We learned a lot from the Russell Wilson trade. In fact, we talked about it bump to open the show. But what was the most surprising outcome? I have 3 potential picks. I think that the first to me and to anyone is probably the most immediately obvious. Now, you can look at the second half of 2020 and a very uneven 2021 campaign for Russell Wilson and say, hey, Russell Wilson was in decline. Bump, I know that you and I have talked about the end of Russell Wilson's tenure in Seattle, and you've said the same, where you would notice kind of like trends that he would have and things he would do where you were like, this might be a problem, right? But Russell Wilson's overall play in 2022, I don't think a lot of people saw that coming. And if you did, congrats, do your victory dance. But, let me tell you what. I remember the tweets. I remember the texts. I remember the articles and the takes from March 8th, 2022. No one, very few people, were actually predicting this, that it would be this bad.
No, you shouldn't have. You look at just what he did the year before that. In 14 games, 64% completion rate. We're talking 2021 before he went to the Broncos. 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. In 15 games, one more game in Denver, you go 60% completion, 3,500 yards, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and was sacked 55 times. So you look at the stats just on the surface and you say, was irresponsible with the ball? Might have held on to the ball too long. Just not a good year for Russell Wilson. Never in my life would I think that at this point of his career, he would have a stat line like that. No. But some things happen. I always point this out to people because, like we mentioned, it's a team sport. Yesterday we mentioned Geno can't win a Super Bowl by himself.
Yeah.
Russell ain't going to lose by himself. Quarterback, wide receiver situation, offensive line, and then the off-the-field stuff that didn't help his mental on the field. He loses his coach the year before that. There are some things that affected Russell Wilson. To sit here and just bash him and say that it's done, I don't know. He's got 10 years of excellent play before that to make you believe that he's capable of bouncing back. But when you look at this whole thing, just the poor player Russell Wilson, to me, had to be the biggest surprise.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the Geno argument. Like, whenever I saw people arguing against paying Geno, I'd see well, you have 1 year of good play and, 6 years of him being a backup. Well, for Russell Wilson, you had the better part of a decade of him being good. Yeah. Not just he's serviceable, good enough for other teams to call about trades and good enough for this team to pay him, twice? 2 more times in addition to his rookie deal? He was tied to the success of this team, to a Super Bowl trip for this, to 2 Super Bowl trips for this team, to winning seasons for this team. You can hate Russell Wilson. You can not like Russell Wilson. You can feel the way you want about him and still recognize that he was a baller. So his struggles, you and I both expect them to improve in 2023, but the depth of them was surprising. What about you? What's the most surprising outcome from the Russell Wilson trade?
Most surprising outcome would be his fall from grace.
Overall. For sure.
Because, yes, even when he was here, there were rumblings about he doesn't like this, he doesn't like that. But there's some things you can always depend on. He was going to come into the podium, whether you liked it or not. He's going to say all the right things. Yeah. He's going to point out everybody else, show some love. He's going to the hospital on Tuesdays. There are some things that you can always bank on when it comes to Russell Wilson. And because he was ours at the time, I think you overlooked some stuff, right? Because he's yours. Just the way that people talk about Russell now in Seattle is completely different. And you could say, it's because he went to a different team and he abandoned us, and I get all that. You can feel that way. Bobby's situation was a bit different, but the way that he was received when he came back to Lumen is completely different. Again, circumstances are different. There's some details that you can't ignore in those situations, but just the way that people view him and talk about him now is crazy. And I always go back to when they flew over to Europe and he's talking about doing high knees in the aisle, when it's I was doing high knees. They were sleeping, but I'm always trying to get better. So I ask myself, and I'm going to ask you guys the text lines too, were we just ignoring that? Because we always had our little something about Russ, it might not be authentic, probably not the greatest when it comes to relationships. But as soon as he left, man, we're nitpicking the heck out of this dude. And I have to ask myself that. I'm like, man, was I ignoring it? And now that he's gone, now I'm just all over it. That was my thing, is just, man, his fall from grace was dramatic. It happened quickly.
Yes, it was like everyone else getting in on this weird joke about him. And it became controversial because, again, there was nothing he was doing that made him a horrible person. So people were like, why are you dragging this guy when other people have done, the same season Deshaun Watson gets his fully guaranteed contract and people are being so critical of Russell Wilson. Like, I remember a lot of those arguments, but it felt like it was the first time that, like, the joke was out there in the open. And for anyone who thinks, like, oh, Russell Wilson was only like this the last couple years, I've covered Russell Wilson for almost the entirety of his career. He's always kind of been like this. Like,
a little different.
He is. He's a little different, and there's nothing wrong with it. But, like,
Yeah.
I did this interview with the Denver station, and they were, like, dragging me for it, saying that I was saying he was a toxic locker room presence, which he absolutely was not. But he was just different. He's not super personable. He's very professional, but to a T, right? Like, he's just unique. He's incredibly prepared, but also incredibly guarded. Like, none of it's bad morally. It's just different.